I still reside in the city where I grew up and work at a small grocery store that is a local enterprise. Actually, the grocery business was founded in the late 1980s by my parents, who still own it now. Although I've been volunteering there my entire life, it was only fitting that I work there. I became an official employee when I was 14 years old. I have a broad knowledge base. Since there aren't many of us, about 12, I take on whatever responsibility that comes along. I can typically do anything from cashier to shelf stocking to customer service because I know the store quite well. The store only has 3 check lanes, and they are rarely all open at once. The busiest times of day are typically Saturday and Sunday afternoons. Every day at 9 p.m. we close. I happened to be the lone worker one evening. It was a little after 8 o'clock. At 7:30 I had sent the other employee home, and I felt more than capable of handling the rest of the evening. There were generally a few things to finish before we closed, but they weren't really time-consuming. This was an uncommon time for us to have numerous customers. Furthermore, I recalled that during the hours of 8 o'clock and 8:30 p.m., only 2 people entered the store and made a few purchases. After that, the store was deserted for a few minutes. Approximately at 8:40, a man entered. Although the grocery store was rather small, there were still enough aisles that I was unable to see everything from my check line. Additionally, the entrance-exit door was at the far end and hardly visible to me. As the guy walked in, all I actually saw of him was the corner of my eye. I lost sight of him as he appeared to head down one of the first aisles. While I waited for him to finish shopping and check out, I sat in my check line. We had roughly 20 more minutes to remain open. Stood up only once throughout that period to straighten one of the surrounding shelves. I reasoned that because it would need to be finished before I left, I might as well finish it now. There wasn't really anything else I could do. Before long it was 9 o'clock, and we were shut. I announced the hour and that we were closed over the store's intercom. Then I thought, the man would carry his belongings to the front of the business. After about 5 minutes, he was nowhere to be seen. I then declared something else. I made the decision to go find the man after a few more minutes had passed, and he was still nowhere to be seen. Actually, the store wasn't that big, so I definitely would have recognized him, as I hadn't seen him since he walked in. However, I had missed him. It didn't take me long to go through every aisle in the store, as I began to move around and up and down the aisles in search of the guy. I had not seen him when I was finished. It occurred to me that he had to have gone, presumably while I was cleaning up that one specific place. I suppose I had failed to notice him walking away. I continued with my nocturnal tasks after that. This involved mopping the floors and ensuring that everything was tidy and free of messes. It would also mean getting some stuff ready for the next day. I went over and locked the doors first because I hadn't done so yet. However, I was actually doing so when I heard a commotion coming from inside the business. It resembled a person strolling, but it was very different. The sound was low, yet it seemed as loud as it could have been by then because the interior was dead silent. After shutting the door, I timidly shouted out to see if anyone was home. Since my parents were both out of town, and I was the only one working, there was no way that anybody else could make it. The idea crossed my mind right away that perhaps the man had stayed inside and was just hiding. It got worse when no one responded to me. Even though I knew I had to go look and see who was there, I didn't want to. I gradually began to make my way down the store's aisles, toward the area where I thought the noises were coming from. I walked down each aisle, and they were all empty. I was dying from the tension and stillness of the scene. I made the decision to call out once more, this time sounding friendlier. I said, "We're closed right now, so if you have anything to buy, I can ring you up at the front." Nothing yet. The sound started up again when I moved down the next aisle. The very next aisle over from mine was being occupied by footsteps that were going from one end to the other. As I continued down the aisle, I heard footsteps approaching one end. Instead of going farther away as I had anticipated, they began to approach my aisle. I had made my way to the far side of it by now. I turned to look in time to see whoever it was. Then I caught sight of him. The man who had entered the store earlier was in fact the identical one. He was staring at me directly as he stood there. Then he approached me on foot. Initially, I approached the front of the store, close to the checkout lanes, believing the man might be leaving. But after just a few steps, the guy came racing in my direction. It didn't seem like a joke that he was sprinting. Running away from the person was the only thing that came to mind. I dashed to the front of the shop and entered the staff-only break room, which was located down a short corridor. Additionally, there was a lockable door. I hurried to get inside and locked the door. The man pursued me in there, which surprised me as much as it did. He proceeded straight outside the door and attempted to open it, and he began to leave when it refused to open. Even so, I wasn't sure he was going to leave the shop. I yelled at him to get out of there because I was going to call the cops. I then made a 911 call. I could hear the guy wandering around every now and then while I waited inside for the police to arrive. I heard him someplace in the store, but he was far away, and after a while I stopped listening. I went outside to meet the cops when they arrived, and the man was nowhere to be found. The man was gone when the police searched the entire store. A few things were missing from the shelves, and the cash register's money was pilfered. A lot worse could have happened aside from that. He received just a little bit more than $100. I'm glad to be doing well. I'm still curious about the specifics of his strategy. Was this an attempt by him to harm me? I'm still employed at the grocery store and nothing like this has occurred. I spent a calm evening last year shopping. Even though it was later in the evening, my neighborhood grocery store was still open. They are usually open until rather late. It was, I believe, around 11 p.m. The calm atmosphere was one of the things I enjoyed about shopping at that time. I spotted a few other shoppers that night in particular, but not many at all. There was about every kind of grocery you could want in the very large supermarket. I parked my trolley close to the vegetables and proceeded to travel through each aisle one by one. I had a lot of stuff I needed to buy, but I could shop quickly because the store was almost completely empty. I was almost done shopping when I entered one of the store's center aisles. I can't recall precisely what was in it, but I had been there for approximately 20 minutes. There was only a low volume of music playing over the store speakers, and I was the only person in that aisle. Suddenly, there was a tremendous crash from the aisle across from mine. Curiosity drove me to stroll over and see what had transpired. The sound had been like a lot of random objects tumbling off the shelf. I moved on to the next aisle, leaving my cart where it was. As soon as I arrived, I spotted someone running out of the aisle at the opposite end. They quickly disappeared from view, so all I could see was the rear event, but it looked like a male. Then I noticed the harm he had done. Several objects were scattered on the floor across the aisle. It appeared as though someone had forced them all to the ground. Since the person who had done it had left, I decided to return the objects to their proper place on the shelf. It only took a couple of minutes, maybe 3. There were perhaps 15 or more pieces that had fallen over. After doing this very odd act, I just went back to my cart in the adjacent aisle and carried on with my shopping. As I mentioned before, I needed to pick up a few items from the dairy department to finish up. There was just one other customer I passed as I made my way there. While getting yogurt at the dairy, I noticed another customer had arrived. It was a dude with a gray shirt and jeans on. He was loitering in the store's far rear corner. I continued doing what I was doing without really noticing. But then an odd thing occurred. I noticed the man making his way over to the store's drink goods display. The man approached it directly and shoved the exhibit, causing it to topple over. Another loud noise was made when all of the drink cans dropped to the ground. Fortunately, none of the drinks cracked or spilled, but they still went everywhere. Aside from the fact that this was probably the same man who had made the previous mess in the other aisle, I thought this was pretty unusual. I reasoned that it would be best to avoid him. The man walked quickly in a different direction after toppling the display. As I was finishing up the last few things I needed to buy, I noticed a store employee approach and see the mess. Since I was the only other customer in the vicinity, he inquired as to whether I had witnessed the incident. I related the tale to him and brought up the event in the adjacent aisle. The staff member gave a dismissive shake of his head and moved to tidy up. I turned around to get to the checkout. There were 3 check lanes in the store that were still open when I arrived at the vacant checkout lane. I soon finished paying for everything and left. I walked out of the store and into the calm parking lot to get into my car. After approaching my car fairly close, I heard footsteps coming from behind. I saw that they were walking more quickly and turned to see who it was, the same guy who had overturned everything inside the business. He was approaching me with an aggressive gait. I wasn't sure what he wanted with me, but it seemed like it. I continued to walk to my car, but I was never going to get there before he did. The footsteps were right there until I had almost reached the backside of my car, so I stopped and turned around. I was now looking directly at the man. With my shopping cart as the only obstruction between us, he came to a stop and stood opposite me. Not sure what to do, I said hello to the man. In response, the man demanded my car's keys, telling me he was in need of them. I told the guy no, since I was genuinely shocked by this. The man then lunged forward and grabbed the sides of my shopping cart, tipping it over and dumping all of the groceries bags onto the sidewalk. I turned and rushed for my car's front door as the cart toppled over. In a way, the man had put himself in a bit of a bind. Only when I was directly outside the driver's door did I press the unlock button on my car's keys, at which point I opened the door and got inside. I quickly locked it after that. Shortly after arriving, the man attempted to unlock my door and then began pounding loudly on the window. I accelerated the engine and quickly retracted. The man was standing there when I actually backed into my shopping cart, which was still lying on the ground. I then quickly drove off. I contacted the cops once I was on the road and out of the parking lot. I informed them that the man was still in the parking lot and that I had reported the entire thing. Sadly, I had left all of my food at the store. I had to go grocery shopping again the following day because there was no way I could go back. Ultimately, though, I'm just relieved that the man missed me.